Hi, and welcome to AP Daily. My name is Greg Hill, and I teach at Dr. John D. Horn High School in Mesquite, Texas. Today, we're going to open up topic 3.3 Cultural Patterns. This video will examine how regional patterns of language, religion, and ethnicity contribute to a sense of place, enhance placemaking, and shape the global cultural landscape. What will we learn? First, we'll see that place is a location's physical and cultural characteristics. I often like to use the I often like to use the question in my class, what is it like when you get there? Think about when you go to your best friend's or your Aunt Susie's house or your Aunt Crystal's house for dinner. What is it like when you get there? When you go on vacation, what is the first thing you take in? You take in the physicality of it. You have dinner or you'll have lunch and you'll maybe have some local foods. You're figuring out that is all a part of a location's, that is all a part of place. Placemaking is also important. This is a process in which a community or a culture group gets together and plan out their public space. Language can influence things such as toponyms or place names and also forms of communication. Ethnicity can influence the goods and services available, the type of architecture where people live, dialects within a language, and also create ethnic enclaves. Ethnic enclaves are areas which tend to congregate with one particular ethnic group. You can see evidences in shops and businesses and other services or even schools that are in this area. Religion can also influence toponyms, also influence architecture, as we saw in topic 3.1, and even who can live where. Let's look at an example. Ecuador is one of my favorite countries in the world. Now, it might surprise a lot of people, but I just love the humility of the people. As you can see on this map, there's evidence of both Quechua, which is the language of the indigenous, and Spanish, the language of the colonizers, in place names such as Guayaquil, Cuenca, Santo Domingo de los Colorados. You can see it also in the country's name itself, Ecuador, which stands for equator. Now, I want to share a little story with you, and it's kind of funny for some, maybe not for you. But during my time in Ecuador, we had to learn Quechua. Now, I didn't know that once we got there that all of the instruction would be in Spanish. So you can imagine how difficult it was to first process the words in Spanish, then try to process it in Quechua, and then put it back into my native English. Here with the name of the city of Otavalo in Ecuador, it's the historic name of a local indigenous group. All throughout the city, you see evidence of their cultural traits on the cultural landscape, which Ms. Patel taught in topic 3.2. This is a sign of a bike path or a ciclovia in Spanish. In many parts of the Andes, there's a mixture of indigenous, Afro-Andino, and Spanish influences on the cultural landscape. You can also see it in the names of businesses. Here you see a Quechua name for this restaurant, Ali Alpa, which happened, if you're ever in Otavalo, Ecuador, I suggest you go there. They have some of the best steaks in Otavalo. Imbabura is a local volcano. It is also the name of the province which houses the city of Otavalo. Imbabura is a volcano that also has significant spiritual importance for the Otavalan people. Here in the Sutra market in Cusco, Peru, you see the introduction of English along with Spanish and Quechua. What do you think influenced the introduction of English here? Could it be that there are a lot of tourists that come to Cusco from all over the world, especially English-speaking countries? Religion. Mecca, Saudi Arabia is one of my favorite cities to talk about as a great example of this. Mecca is the holiest city of Islam. Here you have pilgrims from all over the world that come over to visit because of its religious significance. You notice in the background the various towers, you'll see the cranes and other things that are showing the modernity that the Saudi government is putting into this city. The Grand Mosque has drawn massive development, as you can see here, but it still reigns as one of the most important parts on the cultural landscape. Here in Tallinn, Estonia, you have the Alexander Nevsky Cathedral. It is an Eastern Orthodox church which shows the Russian influence on the former Soviet Republic. In Berlin, Germany, I was able to visit the Kreuzberg section of Berlin. It is home to one of the largest Turkish populations in the world. Turks in Germany often express themselves, especially during Turkish holidays and during major events in Turkey proper. Businesses are adorned in Turkish or with Turkish references, as you see here, the Istanbul supermarket, which specializes in delicacies and products direct from Turkey. Also, in many parts of Kreuzberg, you'll see a duality of German and also Turkish names. Here is a mosque, which is embedded in the community. There are also several restaurants and cafes, and I was lucky enough to partake and try Turkish food. The owners there were third generation Turks that had come over uh, post World War II to work in many of the factories and decided to stay and have generation after generation. They were some of the most hospitable people I had ever met. What should we take away? Regional patterns of cultural elements like language, religion, and ethnicity contribute to place in place making. I'd like to give a special shout out to the Raiders of Walter and welcome to AP Daily. My name is Greg Hill. I teach at Dr. John D. Horn High School in Mesquite, Texas. Today we're going to open up topic 3.3, cultural patterns. In this video, we'll examine how language, religion, and ethnicity are factors in creating centripetal and centrifugal forces. What will we learn? First, centripetal forces are things that unite a group of people. It could be a common language. It could be a strong sense of nationalism. It could be pride in a national or Olympic team, or as Mr. Kevin said, one of his favorite soccer teams. It could be ethnic religious homogeneity. All of these contribute to bringing people together. Centrifugal forces. These are things that break people apart or divide a group of people. This could be ethnic discrimination, political unrest, or political division. This could be human rights issues or economic inequality. Let's look at an example. For centripetal, think of the Kurds. First, they are a group that have ethnic homogeneity. They also have a religious homogeneity in practicing their own form of Islam. They have their own unique flag, and they have a strong desire to carve out their own homeland that they like to call Kurdistan. The Koreas. Now, for me, I see the Koreas as both a centripetal and a centrifugal force example. As far as centripetal, at the island of Dokdo, which is just off the coast of South Korea. Both North and South Korea hold that this should belong to South Korea, whereas Japan believes it should belong to them. Also, in terms of the naming of the Sea of Japan, both Koreas agreed that it should be the East Sea. Another thing that brings them sort of together is their disdain for the history of Japanese aggression during World War II. Lastly, ethnic homogeneity. There is a belief by many Koreans of the purity of Korean blood. Centrifugal forces. Now, post Korean War, both North and South Korea were divided on which form of government that they wanted to partake in. This has led to serious contentions between both parties. Religious freedom is enjoyed in the South, but is not enjoyed as much in the North. The Republic of Korea, aka South Korea, and its alliance with the United States has been a sore spot for North Korea. The DPRK, or the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, aka North Korea, and its alliance with the Communist bloc has been a thorn in the side for many of the allies of South Korea. Another centrifugal example is Kashmir. It is an area occupied by the country of India. Here you see Muslim citizens clashing with Indian police. Let's practice. Which of the following does not act as a centrifugal force for a state? If you need to pause it and think about it, take this time to do so. The answer choice is C, linguistic homogeneity. What that means is a group of people speak the same language. What should we take away? Or as I'd like to say, what's the gist? Cultural elements such as language, ethnicity, and religion are factors that create centripetal forces, or things that bring people together, and centrifugal forces, or things that divide a group of people. My name is Greg Hill, and this has been your AP Daily.
Hello and welcome back. I'm Ms. Patel, here to teach you about topic 3.4, types of diffusion. So, what are we going to learn today? First, we need to learn what diffusion is. So, all cultural phenomena and ideas in the world have started somewhere, or sometimes multiple places at the same time, and have spread outward from there. The starting point of a cultural phenomenon is called a hearth. And as people interact, more cultural practices spread. Some things may diffuse more than others, which results in some things being clustered and other things being dispersed all over the world, or sometimes a little bit of both. There's many different types of diffusion that you need to know. So first I'll just show you what they are, and we'll get more into it. First is relocation diffusion, and then there's expansion diffusion that splits up into contagious, hierarchical, and reverse hierarchical, and stimulus. So let's learn about each one of these more. First, we have relocation diffusion. So in relocation diffusion, the idea only spreads when a group of people physically move and bring that with them. A good example of this is all of South and Central America. Almost all of South and Central America are Spanish speakers today. Most of them are Roman Catholic, and a lot of that is because the Spanish colonized the area and brought that religion and language with them. Next, we have contagious diffusion. This is when something spreads very rapidly and is pretty widespread. So a key thing to remember here is it's not always a disease, although it seems like that's the only thing it could be. A disease is also contagious, but there's other examples. So first, let's use a disease example. The Spanish flu is a great example of this since it spread so far all over the world and hit almost every person it came into contact with. But let's look at an religious example. Islam is an example of contagious diffusion because as soon as there was sightings of Muhammad in Saudi Arabia, almost everyone in the surrounding area, the Middle East and North Africa, started believing in Islam. So it spread very quickly to the surrounding regions. And next, probably the most obvious to anyone here, is a meme or a viral video. So most people are aware of certain memes and viral videos, and therefore those are considered contagious diffusion since they spread to almost everyone very quickly. Next, we have hierarchical diffusion. It helps to think of a pyramid here, or some kind of hierarchy, because this idea has to spread hierarchically. So it starts with someone of power or a large city, and it moves downward to the social hierarchy, to people that are in smaller cities or less known. So a good example of this is clothing fads. If a certain celebrity starts wearing a certain outfit, you might see some people wearing that outfit, but it won't hit every single person like it does, like contagious diffusion would. Not everyone will buy that outfit, not everyone might like it. It can also go the reverse of that. So there can be reverse hierarchical diffusion. This is when it goes from a smaller or less populated area all the way up to a large city eventually, or people of power. A great example of this is Walmart. So Walmart started in a small rural town in Arkansas and slowly moved to other small towns, and then eventually slowly reached larger cities and even other countries today. Stimulus diffusion is the one that probably trips most of us up the most commonly. So the key here is that the full idea does not spread, but the main or underlying idea spreads. So it's much easier with examples. One great example that's actually super fun to look up different menu items is McDonald's. So McDonald's, when it spreads all over the world, has to also appropriately mix in with the culture in that place. So when McDonald's goes to India, for example, not every single menu item of McDonald's will spread to India. In India, the majority religion is Hinduism, and they find cows to be holy. So actually in India, there'll be cows on the street that cause traffic jams, like in this picture. But because of that, you're not going to see people eating beef. So you won't see beef on a McDonald's menu. This is a picture I took of the McDonald's menu when I was in India, and you see a lot of white meat or vegetarian options. So the idea of McDonald's spread, but it's not the exact same thing. So let's practice with a multiple choice example. A common thing that you have to do is be able to pick out an example of each type of diffusion or figure out which type of diffusion an example is. So if you want to pause your video to fully read this question, go ahead. So the spread of specialty coffee shops across the United States in the 1990s is an example of, so this is a pretty simple thing because you just have to figure out what type it is. But the answer here would be A, because specialty coffee shops are today still not in every town in the US, but they started in big cities and have moved to other big cities and trickled down to some small towns. You're not going to see them everywhere. So what should you take away? You definitely need to know the different types of diffusion, and we'll practice them further in the next video. But you need to be able to distinguish examples of each one and or potentially give an example if asked a type of diffusion. Remember to go out and find the good in the world, and thank you for listening. Hello and welcome back. I'm Ms. Patel, here to teach you about topic 3.4, types of diffusion. So today we're going to learn a little bit more about the different types using examples and look at barriers to diffusion. So remember that it's very important to know the different types of diffusion. If you'd like to go back to the first video to look at those different types again, I advise you to do that because it's super important to be able to pick out examples or provide an example of different types of diffusion. So just as a reminder, here's the different types on the screen. The other thing that's pretty important are some big examples that come up across all units pretty frequently. So the first thing to know, and Mr. Hill's going to talk to you about this more in topic 3.7, is that religions divide up into two big categories of universalizing and ethnic religions, and they diffuse very differently. And universalizing religions tend to be more contagious or hierarchical diffusion, whereas ethnic religions tend to be more relocation diffusion. And very similarly, another big topic to know and be able to apply is pop versus folk culture. So pop culture, very similarly to universalizing religions, moves contagiously or hierarchically, such as something coming out of Hollywood, or if it's folk culture, it doesn't tend to move unless that group of people moves, such as, so it's relocation diffusion. The other thing we need to talk about is that there are reasons that something would not diffuse or that it would diffuse very slowly. So let's start to think about what some of those things are. The first thing to remind ourselves of is from Unit 1. The distance decay effect simply says something might not move just because it's too far away from that original point. And then there's a lot of cultural barriers. I'm going to give you some examples in a second, such as language or religion, even age, ethnicity, that might prevent something from spreading. There's also physical barriers, like literally if there's a mountain in the way, something might not spread, or a political barrier, such as a government blocking the internet or some kind of governmental difference between the way people think there. It just depends. And economically, you just might not actually have the money to buy something. And so the cultural phenomenon might not move. So let's look at some examples of this. First, we're going to look at the language of Japanese. Japanese is a very unique language because it's actually its own language family. And Mr. Hill will talk more about those language families in 3.7. But Japanese is rare that it's its own family. But if we think about why, and we look at this map on the right, it tells us a lot about how isolated that language was for so long. So it actually makes sense that that language developed on its own, isolated, and that therefore it didn't really diffuse anywhere else. Another cultural example is if we go back to that example from a couple videos ago of the fact that Hindus don't eat beef. So if we go to India and we try to give them a beef burger, it's just not going to spread there because Hindus consider cows holy, so they're just not going to eat beef like other places. Let's practice this with some FRQs. Remember, you can always pause your video to read the whole thing, but we're really just going to focus on part B and C right here, and you can always pause it to read it more. So in part B, it asks you to look at these different slang terms and figure out how slang terms could move in different ways. So they want you to actually give examples for each type of diffusion. I remember this FRQ when it was on the AP exam, and my students loved this one because they love their slang terms. So slang can move in different ways depending on how it diffuses. So relocation and diffusion, it would only move if that person moves and brings the slang with them. Contagious diffusion would be if someone starts using the slang and it spreads very quickly to almost everyone. And hierarchical diffusion would be if a celebrity starts using that word and it slowly spreads to some people using it. Now, if we focus on part C here, it talks about identifying and explaining two barriers to diffusion. So there's a lot of great things you could put here. I'm actually going to show you the rubric, and you can pause the video if you want to read through all of them, but I just want to focus on two of these. So let's say you focused on age barriers. Some slang words are just not going to spread to older people. There's a generation gap, and it would be weird if your parents were saying some of the slang terms I hear teenagers say. The other thing that could happen is the government could literally block the internet from access to, for citizens to access to even see that those slang words exist. But there's a lot of different things here you could explain. Okay, so what should we take away? You should definitely know the different types of diffusion, since they're key to understanding where things are in the world and why they're there. They also help us to explain spatial relationships between different cultures and different cultural ideas. So a key thing to do is to be able to figure out examples of different types of diffusion, or to understand why a particular example is a certain type of diffusion. And another key thing that we learned today is not all phenomena will spread. There's a lot of barriers that will prevent diffusion from happening everywhere for everything. Next video, you will learn about the historical reasons for diffusion from Mr. Hill. Remember to always go out and find the good in the world, and thank